In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the ways in which you can create game objects for your scene. Now, one of the ways you can create game objects is to simply go up under the game object menu. And it's really broken down into two categories. Would you like to create an empty generic game object, which in and of itself does nothing? Or would you like to have a game object that already has a variety of components added onto it to perform some sort of a function? So all of these things are game objects exactly like the empty game object. They've just already got some components on them that give them a specific behavior. So for instance, we could create something like a cube. And here it is, a little cube in our level. And if we take a look at it, it starts off at the top with just a transform. Now, I'm not going to say anything else than that. I know we've already talked a bit about what game objects are, but I'm going to go under game object and create an empty game object. And we can move this around, but we can't see anything. There's nothing here for us to see, and you'll see that it does have a transform component. That just comes in standard. Every game object in your scene is going to have one of these. But the cube is different because it also has a cube mesh filter component. It also has a box collider, and it also has a mesh renderer allowing us to see it. So they're all, again, the same thing. Now, once again, that's one way you can create, is going up under game object and creating one of these from here. Now, another way you can do this, and let me go ahead and nuke out this cube, and we'll nuke out our game object. We're going to come down to the create menu over inside of hierarchy. And we can create everything from here too. Now, we don't have access to the empty game object here inside this menu. So let's just create a point light, and you can see we can move our light around. A quick way that I find myself using to create empty game objects is just Control-Shift-N, and that will just create one anytime you need it. And this is really handy if you need another transform to parent to. So for instance, we could take our point light and just drag it right on top of that game object, and now we've formed a little bit of a hierarchy that we can work with.
Right. Would you like to do a little demonstration?
I would love to.
Go ahead and delete out that game object.
It's gone.
Let's create another empty game object.
Control-Shift-N. Got it.
Now let's go ahead and jump up the components.
All right.
And let's build a component.
What do you want to build?
Well, let's see if we can build a light from there.
All right.
So if we scroll down and we hit light, and we bolt on a light component.
Now notice that was down underneath rendering and down to light.
And we just built a light that we did when we created a point light.
That's right. And if we wanted this to be a directional light, we could just take the type, switch it over to directional, and now it's a directional light. We didn't have to go under game object. We didn't have to go under create. We just built it strictly from scratch.
Right. This is to reiterate the fact that a game object is just basically a transform node that has components bolted onto it. So if you create an empty game object, you can make it look like or work like any other of those objects that are available under create other.
And you're not even limited to that. We could, for instance, create something like a sphere, and then onto that we could add something like a light component, and now this sphere is emitting light. And it behaves just like a light.
Mm-hmm. And if we really wanted to get fancy, we could convert that into a prefab in which we could make copies of it. And this all gets into a little bit more advanced topics that we'll be discussing in later videos.
Right, but the key here is that we talk about how we have created these various game objects. You can create them from menus where you have sort of prefabricated collections of game objects and components. You can create an empty game object, and you can bolt on your own components. And this is something you really need to get the hang of and be very comfortable with. In fact, it's not even a bad idea to spend a little bit of time here inside the component menu taking a look at all of the different things that you can add, just so that if you stop for a minute and go like, hey, I need to be able to emit light from this, you know exactly where to go without even thinking about it.
Right, and with this concept, eventually as you become more adept in your career of Unity, and if you follow some of our more advanced training sets, you will get into scripting where you instantiate these objects via code.
That's something I was hoping we could mention sooner or later, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because that's kind of the other kind of secret way to create game objects during runtime, and that's using scripting. Not something we're going to explore here, but something I want you to know that you can do.
Right. So you don't actually have to have these objects exist inside your hierarchy. They don't even have to exist in your project at the time you run your game. We can actually create most of the stuff that you wanted via scripting if you're so inclined, and it can get a very complex concept to grasp. but it makes it even harder to grasp it in code if you don't have a very sound grounding in what game objects are and how they work inside of the scene view ahead of time.
That's right. Now, assuming that maybe you followed through with our simple game videos that were created a while back for Unity, we actually saw this instancing of objects through code when we were creating the projectile for our spaceship. Each time we were hitting the fire button while playing the game, a game object would be created for a little green laser, and it was being built on the fly. We weren't having to go into any kind of menus. It was all taking place during playback. So again, that's just a quick rundown of some ways in which you can create game objects here inside of Unity. That is going to wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot.